I'm sure we've all played games that we would call memorable, but every once in a while an experience comes along that transcends typical enjoyment. Whether it's for their unforgettable storytelling, groundbreaking visual styles, or genre-defining gameplay. These are the titles that change the gaming landscape forever, and continue to shape the community years after release. Welcome to Legacy Replay, a series where we take a look at these classic games with a set of fresh eyes, and see if they still hold up today. Of course, we'll have to acknowledge the original era they released in to understand their full impact. But the goal is to consider how games have improved over the years, and decide if these legacy titles deserve the praise they continue to garner, or if their fame is simply a product of their time. And I can't think of a better game to kick off this new experiment than one many consider to be amongst the greatest ever made: The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. As I said, the time frame in which Ocarina came out cannot be overstated. The 90s were a magical time, and much like Mario 64, this was the first ever 3D adventure the series had ever seen, so pre-release hype was at an all-time high.
I'll never forget the first time I saw Ocarina of Time. It was in the big Nintendo Power feature, where they talked about it being a Zelda movie and really honing in on the importance of Z-targeting. My little 7-year-old brain didn't really know how to comprehend it, but Zelda 64 captured me from the very start. It showed me everything I desired in a game, even if I didn't know it at the time. All that really mattered though was that we got to play him in a world that looked almost as real as the outside world I was playing in with my friends. At the time, there was absolutely nothing like it, and no game has ever felt that magical before its release to me ever since.
Because of this, I'm not going to really hold the graphical quality of Ocarina as a detriment here, as much as I'd really like to. Every game around this time was trying something new, and still figuring out how to optimize technology that wasn't even close to reaching its potential yet. Instead, we'll focus on how it holds up as an epic adventure, because it's clear from the very start that's what it's really striving to be. Everything in the land of Hyrule is bigger and grander than ever before, and incorporating another axis created a literal new world of possibilities. The introduction of Z-targeting, a vast explorable field and horseback riding, as well as big intimidating bosses, are some of the many new additions that made minds explode when it first hit the scene. And I would say overall, it lives up to that grand adventure aesthetic. I sort of forgot how huge of a game this is. In addition to the 12 dungeons if you count bonus and side content, there's so much to do and discover here. Gold Skulltulas, heart pieces, bottles, masks, fairy fountain upgrades, and even the Big Goron sword quest not only give more life to the world, but all benefit the player in a tangible or mechanical way. Whether it's expanding your wallet size, learning backstory about Hyrule's inhabitants, or simply increasing your survivability. You could stay busy with side quests for quite a long time. I would not say Ocarina is particularly difficult though. Even the bosses seem to be more focused on the spectacle than actual substance here. Ooh, big shiny dragon. I guess I'll just watch until it decides to come back down again. That doesn't mean those spectacular moments don't land, however. I still think one of the hardest hitting events comes when you travel to the future for the first time, and see all the havoc Ganondorf has unleashed on the land. The silence as you exit the Temple of Time is deafening. The bustling crowds in the market square are replaced with lifeless husks. And you have the added pressure of feeling like it's your fault by accidentally letting Ganondorf in when you open the barrier. You're motivated to right the wrongs he's caused. One of the hardest things for a game to pull off is to balance letting the player roam free and discover things on their own, and having enough instruction that they don't get confused. But somehow Ocarina has both an open world and too much guidance at the same time. So getting Epona, for example, is a fantastic side quest. It's completely optional, you don't ever have to visit Lon Lon Ranch to beat the game. But the reward is awesome if you do. You get to ride much faster across Hyrule Field with an adorable companion. I love it. But on the other hand, your blue fairy and annoying owl friend are downright excessive when it comes to hand-holding. Some of this is excusable because of the whole newfangled 3D environment and needing a little explanation, but also, like, I know what a door is, Navi, please! Learning the Sun Song is neat because, again, it's a useful reward for exploring, but I feel like it was a bit of a missed opportunity. At first I thought I had to notice the sketch written on the wall and figure out the song on my own from sight reading, but then I realized that no, I just had to go up and hit A and Navi would explain the whole thing to me. That being said, I do feel like the game utilizes its time travel and music mechanics pretty well. The songs are fun to collect and have a nice variety of uses, especially once you unlock warping. That is very welcome since you start in your treehouse every time you boot up the game as a kid. I particularly enjoyed the Scarecrow's song. It's clever that you make up the melody yourself and have to remember it or write it down, and it feels good when you're observant and play at the right places to gain some goodies. Even switching between the past and future timelines, while a little longer of a process than I'd like, leads to some cool moments. I had a blast planting beans and seeing where it would take me, or watching the world change and grow, like the shop being built as a kid turning into the finished product as an adult. Unfortunately, there is one major setback that seems to drag down the entire experience. The whole game feeling like a grand adventure means that everything also has to feel theatrical and painstakingly slow. I'm not just talking frame rate, though yeah, that was pretty bad too. No, every fanfare, every animation, the process of switching out your gear in the menu, using your ocarina, heck, even something as simple as pushing boxes takes forever. I'm sure this did feel a lot more cinematic back in the day, but can someone please explain to me why King Zora has to take all afternoon to scoot 5 feet to the left? And the text, oh man, this is a big no-no. For the most part, it can't be skipped, and it moves at a snail's pace. But occasionally, you are able to fast forward, and it immediately goes all the way to the end of the whole block, so you skip everything all at once. There's no in between here, and if you try to read it again, you're stuck with the unbearable speed. This is something that feels especially out of place in today's landscape. We figured out a pretty good system for skimming text at our own pace nowadays. This single pitfall may not seem like a big deal at first, but the longer you play, you realize that it's pervasive in most every aspect of the game. The dungeons themselves are mostly okay, other than a few that feel either too long or linear. The rest would be passable if it wasn't for these slow mechanics bringing them down. The obvious worst offender is the water temple, no surprise there, and yeah, it's just as bad as people remember. Equipping the iron boots constantly combined with bland and empty rooms are bad on its own, but add in the 3 water level switches that only work in one direction, and you have a recipe for shoot me now soup. Luckily, they did fix a lot of this in the 3DS remake by making the boots an item that toggles quickly and clearing up some of the confusing layout. Other than that, I would say the rest of the dungeons are more marred by issues that the series as a whole already struggles with. A friend of mine once said that Zelda puzzles are essentially a series of unenjoyable tasks with a bow on top, and I honestly have a hard time arguing with that. Simply killing all the enemies in a room, shooting eyeball plaques, or collecting arbitrary keys aren't exactly thrilling on their own. The dungeons get their mojo by how it strings them together and connects to the overall theme. Usually this involves finding the key item and using it in creative ways. But this is why things like winding hallways changing the layout of a room are refreshingly unique. I wish there was more of these and less empty Z-target battle rooms. Speaking of which, props to Nintendo for creating such an innovative way to make fighting in 3D more manageable, but I'm so glad this is something that's improved over the years too. Killing bats is straight up torture here. I think my favorite dungeon is the Spirit Temple, mainly because the concept of switching between young and old Link to progress fits so well with the theme of time travel, but it doesn't really reach its full potential. You very briefly become a kid in order to get the silver gauntlets, which is literally used a single time to unlock the second half of the dungeon as an adult. It might as well have just been a special key or something. It would have been a lot cooler if throughout the dungeon you had to switch back and forth to change the layout or use your various skills to advance further. But of course that also would have been agonizing going back to the Temple of Time so often. What if instead of the silver gauntlets, since you get the golden ones like an hour later anyway, you unlocked a portable pedestal to switch timelines on the go, and that was the key to finishing the dungeon? This would also be a fantastic final item in the game that could then be used to find the rest of the secrets in the world faster as well. But hey, we're talking 1998 here, they did the best they could. Briefly, I wanted to talk about how Zelda has evolved to where we are today, and relate it back to my thoughts on Ocarina. What have they learned in the 20 years after this release? Well, Breath of the Wild is obviously a massive hit, but a common criticism I've heard is that it's not a good Zelda game. And I think what people really mean by that is that they wish the game had more traditional dungeons. There's only 4 of them, and I mean, aesthetically, I completely agree. They all look exactly the same and are really bland in appearance. I assume people didn't like the objective of finding and turning on the 5 modules, but that doesn't seem any less arbitrary to me than finding small keys everywhere, so to each their own, I guess. But at least on a mechanical level, I think these dungeons are fantastic. Switching the water fountains around and flipping the entire layouts at will to reach new areas felt very clever. And because the controls are directly in your Sheikah slate, you don't run into the water temple issue of having to backtrack to the switches over and over again. There's a lot less of the random, uninteresting tasks in a row, and more thinking of the dungeon as a whole to succeed. Not to mention that the ways you enter each dungeon are exhilarating and unique in their own right too. This is a great example of how we've improved over the years, to make an experience both cinematic and engaging at the same time. I hope we have more dungeons that urge us to think outside the box like this in Breath of the Wild 2. The rest of the quote-unquote dungeon content is split into bite-sized chunks among the 120 shrines hidden in the world. And while I can see the frustration with that, at least for me it helped to serve the exact same aspect that I loved most about Ocarina of Time, letting you roam free to encourage that sense of discovery. It felt like you could search every nook and cranny in the land of Hyrule and find something useful. And 2 decades later, that continues to be Breath of the Wild's biggest strength. In fact, if anything, it harkens back to the original Legend of Zelda more than any other because of this. So how exactly is it not a good Zelda game again? Maybe that's the wrong barometer we should be using in the first place, and instead reflect on if a game is successful at accomplishing its ambitions and goals. And I don't think I've played anything else quite like Link's latest adventure. It passed with flying colors. At the end of the day, it's clear that Ocarina of Time set out to be a striking display of 3D oohs and ahs, and I believe it delivered on that at the time. But it has several quality of life issues that drag down the overall experience, and the lack of difficulty makes a replay drag out more than it should. This is why I'm glad we have things like the Master Quest Edition, that revamp the dungeon layouts and make them a lot more challenging. I will say the 3DS version appears to be the definitive way to play though. Fixing most of the clunky menuing and dialogue issues goes a long way, and a fresh coat of paint isn't something to sneeze at either. I think Ocarina of Time gets a lot of its notoriety from being the first to leap into the 3rd dimension. While I'm not saying it's all nostalgia based and it does have aspects I really enjoyed, the lack of setting out to do anything particularly unique is masked by simply giving us a new perspective in which to see the Zelda staples we've grown so familiar with. In a time capsule, Ocarina achieved a lot in terms of delivering something gamers hadn't seen before. But when it comes to being a timeless classic, I think we've had far better Zelda experiences since. And hopefully we'll see even more innovation as the series travels into the future. Thanks for watching the first ever episode of Legacy Replay. I'll see you next time. Stay frosty, my friends. Hey, I hope you enjoyed something totally new for the channel. I had a ton of fun putting it together. Feel free to leave suggestions for future titles you'd like to see covered here. What are some of your favorite influential games that are worth a replay in 2020? Let me know in the comments below. Bye-bye.